about functions. I'm going to go out to CodePen just to do some examples. CodePen is a lovely site where you can write some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and have it render right there on the page. Kind of cool. With a paid account, like I have, you can actually do some other crazy things. Let's see, let's call this function examples. Morning. I'm going to change to professor mode if I can remember where on earth that is. Oh, it's interchange view. Professor mode. Now I'm going to put this in Slack, and what this does for us is that you can follow along on your own computer and see it as I do it, and you can even copy and paste out of there. You just can't change it yourself. So that is in Slack. You can open this up. So let's just make a function. Add A, B. Return A plus B. Console log that. And we get 7, right? No big whoop. What if we move the function down here? We still get 7. So this is a basic, regular old function expression using the keyword function, giving it a name, etc. And JavaScript does something called hoisting. What that means is, as long as you're within the same scope that that function was defined, you can call that function higher up in the code than the function definition actually occurs. Kind of weird, but it does it. And sometimes it's kind of nice that it does it. It means you don't have to worry too much about the order of things if you have lots of functions that depend on each other. So besides a regular plain old function expression, we could also just assign it to a variable. We said functions are just objects like anything else, right? So what if I made a variable called add and set it to this same function, but an anonymous function? Just take the name out of there on the right side and assign it to this variable on the left. Let's just refresh the page to make darn sure that it really ran. I don't see any errors, but where's my where's my error? Let's use the real console instead of the console that they give us. Okay, that's a few more than I needed. Let's just do something to make it run again. Add is not defined. So if we do it this way, we can't use it before we define it. Which may be what you want, because that's a little more predictable and a little more the way other things work. What if we used the good old var instead of, yep, still can't do it. Not just an ES6 thing. So what if we use some fancy, well, let's go ahead and put this back up here. Unbreak things. Yay, we've got 7 again. Very good. ES6 gives us this crazy new syntax for arrow functions. Here's what that means. An arrow function looks like this. Your list of args, in parentheses, equal greater than the arrow, curly braces. Same thing as writing out the whole word function like that. Well, almost the same. We'll pretend it's exactly the same for right now. All right. So we could do const add equals instead of function AB arrow. And it still works. Just a shorter syntax. Looks kind of like lambda syntax in some other languages. Lambdas are, to oversimplify, functions as objects. But really, the magic thing about lambdas is the way that variable scope works, which we're about to see. In JavaScript, we typically call them closures. Same thing. Closure, lambda, proc in some languages. More or less the same thing. So let's make a variable called student count. And let's set it to, I don't know, something like 24. I think there's 24, maybe 23 of you. Can I get to student count in here? Looks like it. Let's make a variable in here. How about that? Aw, cuss. Sum is not defined. So this is Lexical Scope. Maybe you've probably encountered this in other languages if you've ever used any other language in the world. But every time you have a new block of some kind, like a new function, that's a new variable scope. So any variables declared and used for the first time inside there cease to exist as soon as that function ends. Make sense? Now, if we had made sum a thing out here, I'm using let because we're going to reassign it, and then done this, sum would be 30 at the end. We already determined with student count that add has access to the variables that were declared in the surrounding context. So just as student count is available, we would expect sum to be available. So since sum wasn't created from scratch inside add, we still have access to it out here, and the changes that we made inside the function persist. Make sense? So we have access to the variables in the surrounding context. That is called closure. It encloses the variable scope of its container. Say we have an if. If true, const name equal Dave, not me, the dude with the hair. Console log, name. What do you think? Name CodePen, that's funny. What's how about this? Oh, cuss. Person name is not defined. Well, it is true. True is true. So that's not the issue. The issue is this is a block. Yeah, there's some curly braces there indicating that this is a new thing that has its own scope. Now, this is an ES6 thing. If I used var instead of const, which is what you always had to use before ES6, now it works. This was confusing. The way var worked is that when you created a variable with var, it was created in the scope of the closest containing function. Not just any kind of block, it had to be a function. If we used var up here on sum earlier on, then that would have worked to log it afterward. I mean, excuse me, it would not have. It would have its own scope because this is its own function. Why don't I, instead of just saying these words, why don't I do it? So forget this thing. Let's say var sum equals all that, and then try to spit out sum. I did too many things at once there. Let's make sure. Yeah, not that. I don't care. Cluttering up my console. Let's make a change. Okay. Sum is not defined down here because even var created a variable in the scope of its containing function. So since this thing right here, add, is a new function, it has its own variable scope. Down here, person name would be created in the scope outside of that if we used var. But we're not going to do that because we don't do that anymore. Because it gets really confusing if you mix var with let and const. So we won't. We don't like to be confused. All right. Let me introduce you to my good friend, this. You'll be sorry you ever met my friend.